Chapter 16. Cell. Cold. Being cold was never comfortable. Johnny, however, had discovered in the past hours that cold was not merely uncomfortable, but outright repulsive. Lightning flashed, followed by a loud bang of thunder that rattled through his rib cage. The air was filled with electricity, and his recently cropped hair crackled and snapped with it. He wasn't used to its new length, and he felt oddly light-headed without the accustomed weight of his braid. The constant rain suddenly increased from a hard shower to bucket loads pouring down on everything outside. The howling wind slammed the huge drops even harder against every surface it could reach. He cursed, digging his thumbs into the base of his spine. He had the worst backache that just wouldn't go away. The cold temperature he was being forced to endure was actually making it worse. Yep, cola was damn repulsive. Filthy, no-class, good-for-nothing, rotten thief! Johnny cursed through gritted teeth. He massaged his back, pacing restlessly back and forth in the small prison cell. He was 3 stories up, and the roof, made of thick metal sheets, was being battered in the heavy rain. The noise was loud and constant. 4 paces long and 3 paces across was all the room he had to walk around and try to ease his discomfort. 4 months. 4 blissful months of staying out of trouble while creating what problems they could for Richard, while running cargo and making excellent profits. 4 months of falling ever more deeply in love with Eiko and she with him. A few days before, they were planning to return to the Dragon class. They made their last drop-off at the clinic run by the Sisters of Mercy in the heart of a major city called Blood Rock. The city had been named after unusually red rock formations in the surrounding area. Johnny was secretly glad they were leaving for home. The last time they contacted their mother, she and the rest of their clan was camped out near one of their most sacred temples. It was one of the Dragon clan's best-kept secrets and a popular spot to get married. They arrived an hour before sunrise at Our Lady of Strays, a clinic and shelter for the poor, the homeless people, and stray animals that reside in the Blood Rock, with their loaded cargo cars full of goods. Some of the cargo was paid for by donations to the Sisters of Mercy. Quite a lot of it was directly donated goods, and some of it was cleverly stolen cargo that had been destined for King Richard. The people volunteering their time at the loading docks didn't ask questions. Quite a few of them suspected that Tim Smith and his family were thieves, just much the same as the former owner of the Dune Lady. Worn out by the long drive, Johnny had leaned back in his driver's seat in the cockpit of his sandship. He had shut down the engines when he and Eiko and her own ship had arrived at the docks. He yawned hugely, thinking he should get up and talk to one of the overseers about the usual paperwork. Goddess, he was so tired. Over the past month and a half, he's been experiencing bursts of energy, followed by frequent urges to take naps. He would often find himself dozing off without warning. The baby stretched, then kicked him hard in the ribs. Oof! Hey, kid, give your poor uncle a break. The boy settled, but only briefly. Johnny smiled indulgently as he placed his hand on his big belly, feeling and watching the baby squirm around in his insides, amazed anew how large his belly had grown over the past months. He blinked sleepily. When he opened his eyes again, dawn had well passed, and Eiko was shaking him awake, telling him that they needed to move their ships to the other side of the parking lot, and she had already taken care of the paperwork. The day was thickly overcast, and a heavy rainstorm threatened. Eiko thought it best to wait it out before returning home, and Johnny agreed. Later that day before the storm broke, everyone took a rare afternoon nap. Well, everyone except Johnny, who couldn't sleep, even though he wanted to. As he lay in bed with Eiko, he had a hard time getting comfortable. His back ached, his legs ached, even his now feminine hips ached. When he was about to drift off, the baby would move, and he would have to get up and use the bathroom in a hurry before he accidentally urinated on himself. He always felt as if his bladder was full to bursting when this happened, but he barely had to go at all almost every time. The last time he had to get up, he was tired, grumpy, and annoyed as he walked back to the kitchen, opening the little refrigerator. Well, walking to the refrigerator wasn't exactly what he was doing, more like waddling up to it, his hugely pregnant belly making it to the fridge well before the rest of him did. It was mostly bare, and what little was in it didn't suit him. His stomach growled loudly as he decided to go for a short walk to the open market that was across the street from the shelter. Not wanting to wake anyone, he wrote a note saying he was going shopping for food and some clothing for Precious, who was going through another growth spurt. That girl had been shooting up like a weed lately. Johnny left the note on the counter, pinned his long black braid back into a bun, putting on his usual headdress, grabbed his money purse, a large carrying basket, a cloak just in case it rained before he got back, and a dagger strapped to his arm to be concealed up his left sleeve. He could no longer wear his short sword around his waist. The belt just wouldn't reach around him anymore, so the dagger would have to do. Crime wasn't too bad here, but didn't hurt to take precautions. It wasn't the best part of town. His pistol was out of the question for the same reason his sword had been left behind, much to his regret. He slipped out, waddling his way to the crowded street market where he was quickly absorbed into the chaotic throng of the shoppers and hawkers. No one paid him any mind as he approached the first vendor stall, offering fresh fruits and vegetables. In no time at all, he was haggling with the old woman that owned it. Later, he made his way to a small cart vendor, and he was soon ordering lunch for himself and everyone back in the Dune Lady. It wasn't long before he was loaded with everything from fruits and vegetables, rice, hummus, pita bread, falafel, and baklava pastries. He bought extra pastries and some cold fruit juice, consuming them as he shopped, too hungry to wait till he returned to the ship, and a few carefully wrapped cooked fish. Johnny then headed off towards a clothing vendor that also sold jewelry. Smiling to himself, he decided to shop for a ring, so he could properly propose to Eiko when they finally arrived home. He paused just for a moment to shift the heavy basket from his right arm to his left, and felt not for the first time one of those false contractions that had started a week ago. The nearness of his time was why Eiko and himself were thinking of going back to the clan. It would be safer to deliver there. Elena was nearly ready to make her move against Richard and his army. Her last message, via one of her rats, had been to that effect, but made no promises that things would move swiftly in her favor. Meanwhile, Johnny was to continue and try to stay out of trouble and steer well clear of the battle when it did happen. Every possible future she saw did not end well for Johnny and her son if they were somehow caught up in the fighting. With a grimace, he resisted the urge to massage his abdomen so he would not attract attention to it, then proceeded to the clothing vendor's stall. That was when his 4-month streak of good luck ran out. A man was running up from behind him, approaching fast, amid shouts of alarm and indignation. Stacked cages of chickens deliberately toppled over in a flurry of white feathers and alarmed cackles, followed by tall baskets containing peppers and other spices. "Stop, thief!" shouted a familiar voice that Johnny couldn't place. Laughing as if this were nothing more than a game and running for all he was worth, the small wiry man, barely out of his teens, was being pursued by a dozen street guards. His fez hat was threatening to fall off his head, and his tucked-in shirt bulged with whatever stolen items he had managed to stuff into it. His swift light was not slowed one bit as he sent whatever he could find crashing down behind him to trip up his pursuers. People were not immune to this treatment either, though he left most of them standing. Seemingly at random, he would make a point of crashing into a few onlookers, even as they tried to get out of the way. No class, Johnny thought as he snorted in derision, backing out of the way, trying to make himself as inconspicuous as possible. Lousy thief, getting caught in the act so you have to run for it. Suddenly, the thief made a dodge around the woman and her 2 children just feet away from Johnny, smacking into him. He deliberately spun Johnny's ungainly body off balance, attempting to run away with his heavily laden basket. Johnny fell heavily to one knee with a pained grunt, but managed to hang on to his basket as the thief was forced to let go so he could continue running away from the guards. Cursing, he began the procedure of standing up again, a slow and ponderous process that left him dizzy and a bit winded. He suddenly felt a lot heavier than he was used to, making it even more difficult to gain his feet again. "You!" barked the familiar voice in a sudden recognition. "Never mind that thief. Arrest that man. The king wants him." Confused by the sudden shift of his center of gravity, Johnny looked up in time to see a dozen guards suddenly shift their focus from the thief to him. Or still, their leader was the scar-faced man he had first met in the deep desert, and again in the men's bathroom 4 months after he had been fired from the king's service. Alarmed, his hand flew to his neck and found no charm there. The thief had broken the chain and stolen it as he pulled the basket to distract his victim. Now he realized why he was suddenly so heavy and why they could see him as he really was. "Oh, crap," Johnny swore as he dropped his basket and tried to take off running. But they were too close, and he was too weighed down by his pregnancy, and they were on him in seconds. Swiftly he drew his dagger and went for the scar-faced man, aiming for anything vital he could reach. He was thinking by taking their leader first, it might cause the others to hesitate long enough for him to attempt to escape again. The confused crowd abruptly scattered with cries of protest, not wanting to get caught up in the fight. His movements were lightning quick, but only his hands and arms were fast. The rest of his body didn't want to cooperate like it used to. The scar-faced guard managed to leap out of the way with only a nick in his vest. Another guard rushed him from the side to tackle Johnny to the ground. He saw the man coming, and he tried to whirl around and face him, as he was taught to do with years of self-defense training. Only that movement caused him to stagger with his new center of gravity, no longer being so partially supported by the charm. It caught him by surprise and threw him off balance. In the split second that he needed to recover, the guard grabbed his knife hand, while his other hand hit Johnny hard across the jaw. He fell sideways to the ground, seeing black spots swimming before his eyes from the pain. The man had one hell of a right hook. Another guard kicked him painfully from behind. Terrified that one of them might kick him in the belly, Johnny gave up the fight and curled himself into a fetal roll in an effort to protect his unborn nephew. He hated having to get up so easily, but for the sake of his baby, he had to do it, at least until he could figure out how to escape some other way. Help was out there, they just had to wake up and find him. "I yield!" he cried and dropped his knife in surrender. The former royal guard laughed cruelly and said, "Hiding in plain sight, were you? I should have guessed. Pick him up and take him to prison. If he makes any attempt to escape, hit him hard in that big fat gut of his." They hauled him to his feet and marched him towards their coach with bars on all the windows just around the corner, threw him in and locked the door behind him. Johnny rubbed his aching jaw and wondered how the guards had managed to hit him with the green ward in place. Then he realized in horror, the spell must have dissipated without his noticing, and the timing couldn't have been worse. Realizing that the baby would be coming sooner than he expected, the coach lurched into motion, and Johnny hung his head and silently wept. At the same time, a flash of lightning and a crack of thunder went off with an ominous rumble. Rain began to pour down, at first lightly, then harder, as if the sky wept with him in sympathy. Johnny swore in 3 languages at the electricity in the air. Communication and teleportation magics would be interfered with, and that made getting help a lot more complicated. One of the first things the bearded Scarface guard did to him was search him for more weapons. When he found Johnny was unarmed, he removed Johnny's headdress, grabbed a hold of his bun, and used his own dagger to cut it off. He laughed and said to the other guards holding him down on his knees in the cell, "Can't have him using those hairpins as weapons." Johnny's cheeks flamed with humiliation as they left with his headdress frayed. Yet he made no protest, and he remained silent so they wouldn't beat him. When the formal royal guard had cut off his hair, Johnny had it symbolically gelded, and the guard knew it. His companions all laughed nastily at the spiteful joke when Scarface explained the tradition to them. They left, still laughing after they slammed shut his cell door. Clanmen wore their hair in a loose veil down their backs when they courted or married, a traditional symbol of virility, strength, and the intention to be an excellent provider and father. How could he do that now with this unruly chopped-up mess his hair was in? Then again, he might be dead in a day or two, and then it wouldn't matter anymore. The time he had left to be rescued depended on the weather, how well the communication mirrors would work, and on how quickly he could be delivered to King Richard for a personally witnessed execution. Long after sunset, neither deluge nor the electrical charges in the sky showed any sign of letting up. He prayed to the goddess that his family would find him and help him escape in time. A common black ratter skittered along the outside of his barred cell door, paused, and looked in, then, smelling nothing of interest, moved on. Johnny watched it intently, but hope died when he saw the rat had no thumbs or spark of extra intelligence in his beady eyes. Johnny was hoping he was a young desert rat he might ask for help, but he was out of luck. Well, at least this place wasn't warded against pests. That meant his rat could get in without difficulty. Johnny cursed again at his backache and his rotten luck. "Would you please stop pacing around in circles and shut up?" snapped a filthy street beggar housed in the cell directly opposite. "I'm trying to sleep." Sighing with exhaustion, Johnny sat down on the shabby cot and lay down, wrapping his cloak around himself more tightly as he did so. Tired as he was, he couldn't sleep. He wanted to take his boots off, but they felt uncomfortably tight because his feet and ankles were swelling up now he had no charm to keep that from happening. He left them on anyway. His boots were keeping his feet warm. Sometime later, Johnny was dozing off at last, in spite of his aches, discomfort, worry, and the constant noise of wind and rain and thunder, only to abruptly snap awake, gasping in pain and surprise. His backache suddenly worsened, and the pain spread to his belly in a hard cramp. "Ow, ow, ow, no, not now!" he hissed in near panic and sudden recognition of what had been going on for the past 6 hours. He clutched his hugely round belly, and that was now tight and hard with his first real contraction. He had gone into labor not long after the guards had left him, and he had not recognized the signs. He fought to keep calm, remembering to breathe through the contraction. Mentally, he chided himself for not figuring it out sooner because Zora, his birth mother, had mentioned something about having bad back pains as a possible sign of her labor in her lessons. "Will you shut up?" the beggar growled at him. "Goddess curse your balls!" Johnny snarled back, tears leaking out of the corners of his eyes. His own were now shriveling up and trying to crawl into his insides, but seemed unable to do so. There was just no room for them to hide in, that space was being so occupied so completely by his nephew. "Ha! I'm a eunuch. I ain't got no balls left for her to curse," the beggar barked with a dry, humorless laugh. "Be quiet, or I'll start yelling for the guards, and maybe next time they'll cut off more than your hair." By now, however, Johnny was ignoring the stupid oaf in the opposite cell. There was a number of more important things going on that had his full attention. First, the contraction was easing up, and he breathed a sigh of relief as the pain faded. Next, outside the small bar window set a few inches above his eye level, there was the sound of huge claws scrabbling for purchase and the slap of wet wings on stone. In a flash of lightning, Johnny could see Precious in full dragon form hanging from the window ledge with her hind toes and her left clawed hand wrapped around one bar. The other foreleg was clutching something he couldn't see clearly. "Precious!" Johnny exclaimed in a loud whisper as he sat up and ponderously maneuvered himself into a standing position. "Daddy!" she called back as she poked her nose through the bars. Dizzy from standing up too fast and not caring, Johnny staggered drunkenly to the window, nearly tripping over his robes and cloak on the way. "Baby, you found me!" he said as tears sprang to his eyes, and he mentally cursed the thief again. He hadn't had to deal with a crying thing for months, but along with the swelling ankles he had to contend with the heightened emotions now that his charm was gone. He reached up to her, touching her nose, and Precious affectionately licked his palm. A cold and sopping wet rat came into view on top of her head and jumped down onto his shoulder and scrabbled down his cloak tail first. "Goldie!" Sulky wet fur and all, Johnny embraced her and kissed her on top of the head. "Love you too," replied the shivering golden rat. "No time. I'll be giving such a scolding for getting in trouble again. Put me down and help Rosie and Gracie in. Precious had to carry him on her forearm, and not a comfortable place to ride." With a bit of helpful maneuvering from his daughter, he was able to relieve her of her burden. Soon 3 sodden rats were vigorously shaking themselves off and sending sprays of water everywhere. "Are you ever going to shut—" snarled the old beggar as he rolled out of his cot to glare at Johnny. He broke off when he saw in the next flash of lightning the dragon still clinging to the bars on the window and the three shadowy figures of the rats. "Little girl," Johnny said with an evil smirk and feeling vengeful, "I think my companion is feeling a bit cold. Perhaps you can warm him up?" The young dragon eyed the beggar and calculated distance between herself and her target, which was actually the cell bars, but he didn't know that. Seeing the calculating look in Precious's posture and expression, the dragon man fearfully backed up to the opposite wall. Never mind. Talk all you want. Call that monster off. She's my daughter, not a monster," Johnny snapped in her defense. Sure," the man replied uncertainly, looking as if he thought Johnny was crazy. "Oh, ow, not again," Johnny moaned in pain. He leaned on the wall in an effort to keep himself from falling to his knees, and a sudden rush of warm fluid came out in a gush, then a trickle from his female part. His loose pants were abruptly soaked between his legs, and more fluid was running down them into his boots. Panting, he gritted his teeth and tried not to panic again. "I hope you have a good plan to get us out of here in a hurry. My water just broke." All four animals saw the pained way that Johnny was standing as he clutched his belly and listened to his labored breathing. "This complicates things," Rosie said in alarm. "One problem at a time," Gracie said serenely. Nothing seemed to upset that one, Johnny reflected as he breathed through the contraction. "Yow! Yow!" Precious screeched in angry frustration, sounding like a big angry wildcat that was a juvenile dragon's attempt at a roar. She tried to brace her feet on the wall and pulled at the bars with all her might. Half-sodden wings beating hard and sending rainwater flying. Bars creaked under the strain of her pulling, but they wouldn't so much as bend. When she realized it wasn't working, she repositioned herself again to cling to the window ledge and bars, using one clawed hand to try to dig through the solid concrete bricks. But she wasn't old enough for that particular magic to kick in yet. Only adult dragons of her kind could dig through solid stone. The contraction eased, and Johnny was able to stand up on his own again. "Precious, stop that. You'll only hurt yourself." "Go back to Echo," Goldie ordered. "Stick to the plan. It's our only chance to get him out of here."